be here today. I'm Anthony Bellcourt, I'm the managing partner at Fadmoor Consulting.
And I'm Mazi Afshari, I'm a finance transformation lead at Magnit Global.
And we are here today to discuss scalable finance transformation with Magnit Global. So before we get into the financial transformation and your role in that, set the table by telling folks here a little bit about who Magnit is as a company, as an organization. So Magnit is a global leader in managing the extended workforce, helping organizations source, manage, and optimize contingent talent at scale through a combination of an AI-powered cloud-based platform and managed services. Magnit enables companies to gain full visibility to their workforce, including contractors, freelancers, service providers, while driving cost efficiency and faster access to critical skills. Today, Magnit supports close to 1 million workers, partners with more than 14,000 staffing suppliers, and services around 600 enterprise clients across 130 countries, placing it among the top providers in the contingent workforce and vendor management space. What differentiates Magnit is its ability to combine technology, data, and human expertise into a single integrated solution, helping organizations build more agile, scalable, and intelligent workforce strategies. So that's a bit about your company. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at the organization, your responsibilities, and how you see being a digital transformation leader at Magnit.
Yep, perfect, thank you. That looks good on paper. I was just looking at it right now, so thank you for that introduction. So as my role as a finance transformation lead itself is, my goal is to be able to drive strategy and execution to kind of modernize the finance and the operation aspect within our company itself, which means improving not only the planning and forecasting and reporting aspect, but also being able to providing better and faster insights for business leaders to make decisions. Because I think that's the hardest part of all of us working in an operations or finance is how can we be able to deliver that in a digestible manner, in a way that the executives can be able to use that to inform decision to be able to make those decisions from itself. And being as a big company, as you guys saw, there is just a lot of pieces into that puzzle. So putting that together itself takes tremendous amount of time, and you need basically tools in order to implement that. Hence the whole aspect of Anaplan where it comes into that picture itself. So hopefully that was good enough introduction before we go into the next questions.
Yeah, and you have a history with digital transformation, correct? So when you were hired at Magnit, I take it you had a vision of how to conduct digital transformation with Anaplan.
Definitely. I do have a background also in finance as well. So what we tend to do as finance, and I think everyone here can attest, being in the finance world itself, we tend to be very reactive to the information as far as what happened of doing so. So what I try to do is kind of shifting that mindset of not only being kind of reactive, but being more proactive, which meant that being able to transforming how we think about it itself and getting away from the cycle of chasing the numbers and driving more insightful decision-making aspect itself. In order to do so, we need to basically be able to be influencers, and we needed kind of platforms in order for us to do so and centralizing these aspects. And that's where Anaplan basically came in, because it connected the data and centralized it for us and could basically paint that picture. And Fadmoor was our solution, basically team implementation partner, basically executed that vision that we have and being able to put all of those cogs into place.
So before execution, when you came in day one though, what sort of challenges were you looking at?
Yeah, like many organizations itself, we saw like fragmented systems and disconnected processes across regions and teams. Keep in mind, we're global, knowing the fact this is a struggle what a lot of global companies do. We're getting the information from different regions and teams, what does it differently, there's different system in place. And when you have acquisitions itself, there's always a tough part of consolidating those aspects itself. So we ran into those aspects like, okay, how can we be able to get that, getting into an ecosystem, we're all looking at the same thing itself, which was our biggest struggle to be able to do so. But also we know that we don't want to be always spending our time of reconciling the data. It loses our time of actually being able to do those insights and the influential aspect that finance team should be doing. So instead of, and I know everyone here within the finance team, we know that our finance team always works hard. But for the lack of a better word, not always the smartest, because we lose the lack of synergy, at least in our cases itself, of having it with business partners to helping us driving the insights and predictability into it, and shifting it from what we always tend to doing is reconciling those numbers, which doesn't leave a lot of room for us to going into the predicament aspect itself, or insightfulness of how can we get ahead of the issues we had on the previous month to next month. Because as soon as we finish understanding what happened in this month, we put the narrative down, we're already into the next itself. So we wanted to basically get away from that cycle and being able to creating something, an ecosystem that could be able to do those in a more autonomous manner itself and leave us more to the critical thinking aspect.
And what sort of tools were you working with at the time before Anaplan that weren't enabling those goals and for you to conquer those challenges? Was it another platform? Was it Excel? Was it process-wise the business was cited with all of these acquisitions? What did that look like with your current suite before Anaplan?
No, 100%. I think overall, just process-wise itself, it was very siloed, right? We had fragmented systems itself and disconnected processes across regions and teams. And there was multiple systems that we were using. And then when we integrate and acquire teams, we tend to lead them as a more of a standalone because of the lack of having a more of a centralized platform that could put it together. So I think what we try to do is to be able to see when the business comes out and saying as business changed with the needs and everything, we needed to be quickly adapting to saying like, how can we get ahead of it? And in order for us to do so, we needed to get better at being able to consolidate the information, which we're always, it's like a catch-22 when we have so many other companies doing so, getting it all together. We realized that there needs to be a better and safer way to doing so, of consolidating it, whether it's going to be a manual intervention that we're using now, or more of an automated aspect to get those processes into a fashion where we can leave the finance thing to start telling the future story rather than always telling the past.
So a lot of challenges, not the right tools in your toolkit to solve those problems. Is it fair to say, though, that there was an organizational awareness on Magnit's part that these were challenges and a desire to run more optimally, overcome these? Case in point, hiring someone with your skill sets. Was the organization sort of ready and had the energy behind taking on these initiatives of improvement?
I would say yes and no. I think the vision was that they wanted to do these fixes, but I think they didn't realize how hard it would be able to get to that point, right? Because as soon as you start uncovering rocks and seeing the difficulty aspect itself and realizing what it requires to fixing it, we definitely got some pushbacks, because you also have to realize you're working with an organization that it's not their necessarily day job to be able to transforming, right? So their day job is, if you go to accounting, they have to closing the books, they have to do journal entries. You go to FP&A, they have to do forecasting. So in addition to that, implementing new tools and stuff, it's something additional they're doing. Obviously, they're going to see the greatest value into it, but getting that threshold of getting them to committing the time and efforts to make sure that you're creating it in the right way so they can see that value is a difficult path to be able to go across. And sometimes it takes longer than expected because there's always going to be urgencies of whether it's going to be executives to be able to get these ad hoc reports, or board of directors have another path of growth, or in this case, hiring freezes. So there's always these scenario that plays into it, which kicks into my roadmap, which I always have to be able to say, like, we can't do this based on this. But it's a journey to getting there itself. But ultimately, I think we're all aligned with it, the value added to that itself. It's just that path could go up and down.
So given the current state of play, we kind of touched the people, the energy, the ambition around it, the process, the platforms you had. When you entered the partnership with Anaplan, you started initial implementation. With that being the current state of play, what were your expectations and how did it unfold from there?
Yeah, so initially my expectations were from the beginning, I kind of wanted to basically establish a few basic foundational stuff, like single source of truth. Because I think the issues that we're running into, we wanted ultimately to make sure that everyone is looking at the same data itself, right? Then after that, having more of a standardized planning processes. As I mentioned before, being global, when you have multiple regions and teams, they tend to do it their own way itself, and consolidation makes it very difficult. Which hindsight would slow down like the cycle of getting the reportings and the plannings on time, which again, we're like, it's a catch-22 because we always run out of that time to drive the insight into it. So we really needed to form it in a way that we can drive agility and insights on very instantaneously to keep up with the trend. Like nothing is going to stop. It's time never stops. So we needed to make sure how can we better, more accurately and faster get to that point, so we're not always running out of it, but we can make impactful decision makings before it happens. So that's always the issue itself. Like even up to this day itself, we haven't really figured it out, but we're getting better at it. And I know what we would have to do. But again, we're always running into the issue, which I think a lot of people can attest to, is the resource capacity, right? A lot of those things itself, you would need the resources to doing so, which is the hardest part with the business that we have. Because again, as I mentioned, it's not the day-to-day job itself. That's why the strategic partner itself, as I mentioned, having Fadmoor helped us to doing so by having an external team to emphasizing on the Anaplan aspect of sales, and then being able to have the internal people start focusing on the operational business aspects.
So after the initial implementation, if I can paint with a broad brushstrokes, it was kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. We got some,
Say the least,
yeah, very, very popular. Get some initial return on your investment, see value, let the organization, like you said, it's not their full-time jobs, see how it makes their full-time jobs easier by participating in the process and then using Anaplan as a part of their day-to-day. So from there, after the organization started to see it, what became the expectations in your phase 1.5, phase 2, continuous improvement? Between larger initiatives, what was that vision coming out of initial implementation to start walking and then running, and how that unfolded?
100%, yeah. So to your point, it's just, we started with the crawling and then walking aspect itself. It's like once we get to that point itself of having good initial like foundation set up of understanding what we want to doing, is that's when we started to scale, going into having connected aspect of OpEx, revenue, the workforce aspect, workforce planning aspect stuff, and connecting it. And we started to see how business decisions impact the flow of financially in kind of Anaplan itself. And it became it was a big game changer, because then we started to realize, you know what, we have shifted from being the team that says what happened, but instead now it can be like, this is what we should do next. And it was like the mindset of changing it, because it basically set our team, mostly for our FP&A team, up for success, because they could actually focus on, like, we know that this is going to happen itself, and through our assumptions and drivers, a model can give us what we want to look at. And so far, we've been pretty accurate at this point. We're still fine-tuning it, and I don't think we ever reached the perfection aspect, but we have been able to reducing that significantly, where we're along with the budget and the reforecasting aspects that we weren't before, with the massive drivers and toggles that we have into it. So there's huge progress, still a working process itself, but so far right now, we're seeing the progress itself as it happens day by day.
That's great, that's great. And I'm sure with that, and we'll get to talking about the future, what functionality on the platform has you really excited. But before that, what lessons have you learned to date along the way through multiple projects, continuous improvements that you're going to apply as you look forward to what's Anaplan is rolling out, and how to take advantage of that as a business?
100%. I think this has been mentioned in multiple times in different sessions, and I heard it this morning with both NVIDIA and Synopsys when they mentioned it. Change management is critical, right? It's one of the most important things itself. The technology aspect itself is only a part of the equation. The adoption is really where you bring the value, where the team can actually leverage and utilizing what you actually built out in real-time scenarios, where you could actually see a team gaining the knowledge and making the decisions on the fly of understanding these are the repercussions and consequences this would have, which in the past, having the reliance on like heavy Excels and stuff doing so, either you crash on Excel for being it too large itself, but you're always running conversion controls. Looking at the same source of data itself has been instrumental. And another lesson that we learned is, because obviously being a bigger organization itself, we have very complicated models itself. We realized relatively quickly to our partnership with Fadmoor itself of understanding we need to start simple, then scaling. because having a strong foundation earlier on in the beginning is the key, because or else you end up getting boggled down of trying to solve too much too fast, of having bottlenecks and not really getting the progress that we would need it to move forward. So we basically have the strong foundations of making sure the majority which could apply to this model works, and then going back into iterating itself to making sure that everything else works itself. Another aspect is kind of the data governance. And I think we all know the model is only as good as the information that we actually feed into it. So it's very, very and extremely instrumental that there is controls on data validation and controls in the aspect of making sure that people can trust their data, or else you're going to be running into an issue of if you're deploying a product or something that you want to be solving for multiple business teams itself, where they're going to be seeing that if they lose the trust on it, something like this is not working accurately, this is not what I expected, that's a huge uphill battle that you have to go, and then it makes it 10 times harder to actually adopting it for other people within the team itself. So gaining the trust itself originally for them to be able to be happy with the outcomes is truly, truly very important. And then finally, a lesson learned itself is going to be kind of the ownership and accountability aspect. In order for the model to work the way we want it to doing so, it's very important to establish clear roles of responsibility, whether it's come to the finance, the administrative system task itself, and other business stakeholders that will have a big play in making the model successful. Example could be revenue. We can put as many drivers as we want initially, or like levers, but ultimately if we don't have the insights where our salespeople would have that could inherently not specifically be solved by algorithm, that's going to be imperative for us getting more accurate data at the end itself. So it's going to be a collaboration between not only have the technology in place, but also fostering a continuous improvement mentality of making sure that our model can actually address with everything there's a screwball throwing into as a business aspect, we will be able to adapt through that, through making the model better. And as we're getting better and better, eventually, and I know this sounds too idealistic, is it's gonna take less time of us to do the maintaining aspects of, and we can actually driving more predictive insights on understanding how can we do this better, and that's where the value truly from a platform like this will come into play.
Absolutely. So looking to the future, and this is a really exciting time to be asking you this question because Anaplan has so much awesome stuff coming out on the roadmap. So you'll probably have to whittle it down. What things are you excited to explore and bring into your workspace functionality-wise to improve, continually improve how you all manage and plan your business?
Yeah, I think to answer that in a more impactful way itself would be the main core things I'm looking into is kind of speed and intelligence. And how I would say that we're moving towards an aspect where we want to get more of a real life scenario planning aspect, so where we can get comfortable and confident about the numbers that we're getting in is so accurate to the point we don't have to worry about it. And we could be able to look into the future more, right? Same way that the video this morning told us, like, we can't announce that we can predict the future, but yet that is the approach we want to get. We want to get as close as we can possibly into it. And changing the aspect, giving the confidence to the finance team, because the question that always going to come in to a finance executives is always going to be the same. They say, what happens if, right? And I feel like that's a very loaded question. And if you haven't set it up correctly, it's such a hard question to ask. But if it's structurally done, where we can accommodate scenario plannings to be able to be saying like, you know what if we do have a hiring freeze within this department, or we push out 6 months of this, or our growth projection is going to decrease by this much, all of those simultaneously inputting it into the scenario and comparing it to the budget, those are the things that the business leaders want to make informative decisions on, whether we pull the trigger on this, how do we do it as a reforecasting model? Because as we all know, budget is done at a point in time earlier in the year. So reforecasting is imperative to making sure that we keep ourselves aligned with it itself and make sure we don't go over it. And things happen. Sometimes we're on the lucky front itself, we're doing better than expected on the top line. And unfortunately, it could also happen the other way around where we're not. So we need to be able to be very agile and drive those insightful decision making as we go along. So being here as of yesterday itself with all of the sessions that we have with AI make me really hopeful, because I think one missing key link into the whole Anaplan thing itself is like sometimes you need to be more of understanding how the model actually works. The UI aspect itself was a little bit lacking to get the involvement of our executive teams that we didn't get before. By looking at like how the OWP and the other stuff is actually working, where it's more of a drag and drop functionality, I'm glad that there's functionality that we're improving in that aspect, but we could encourage leaderships as far as executive stuff to be a part of it. Because historically, the end users of Anaplan, besides the reporting aspect, has been people like directors, senior analysts, senior managers and stuff to doing so and dragging those live because they know how it works. And it basically left out the executive stuff being the end users of that rather than being able to make the changes. I really like the self-surfacing aspect of you being able to, if you wanted to make simple scenarios itself, you could doing so, which was always a struggle because there's limitation. It was very to the point of gritty, for the lack of better words, being doing these changes, which they're striving away from, and utilizing such as the agents itself that they have, being able to use a prompt-based thing itself. I'm hoping that that can close that bridge, bridge that gap basically that in the past has always been that we would never be able to do so. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Answered a lot of questions. Fantastic. With all that great content, before we move to Q&A, would you mind giving maybe a handful of key takeaways, the nuggets you think were in there that you hope the audience they can pass along?
I think we do have a slide on it to be able to make it simpler. There we go. Perfect. So one of the things itself, a lot of companies might be seeing that finance transformation might be like a program or a project aspect itself, but it truly is a continuous journey, right? Iteratively making it better to be able to be getting ahead of stuff that we didn't think of it before. And like anything itself, it's just a continuous working to making sure that everything is working. And I think Anaplan enables that journey because it connects the people and the teams, the data itself with the projections, and being able to tell that story that wasn't being able to do it, which enhances the agility and adaptiveness of people using the insight to make informative decision-making aspect itself. So there's one part that, as I mentioned before, the technology enables that behavior, but adoption is really the one that actually is going to be triggered of actually utilizing it from the business point of perspective itself. And it's going to come to a point, like if we focus on the governance aspect itself, making sure that it's done correctly and all of the change management and making sure that we iteratively maintain this, it's going to come to a point where the impact goes beyond the finance team itself, right? It's going to be, you elevate from how the entire organization is going to be making the decision-making itself, where it's going to be insightful decision-making at real time, which is going to be saving us, but we're also being able to get ahead of these decisions before they actually happen. And ultimately, when we get to a point where finance is not going to be a bottleneck, but instead it's going to be a kind of competitive advantage of actually having that team itself, that will be like the ultimate goal itself of how can we actually get financial transformation at a scale. So that's the ultimate goal that I'm saying into, which is still a long road to go, but it's a very, very interesting journey along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll open it up Q&A.
I believe so.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation. This is awesome. We're about to start our journey, so this is like well timed for what we're about to see. And my question is, how did you go about building that? Crawl, walk, run. What was of most importance at the beginning? I've heard process, I've heard OCM, I've heard data. How did you go about identifying what was most important up front?
Definitely. I think we reiterated, I think one thing that helped is we had a strategic partner that we worked with, Fadmoor that I mentioned before. We wrote down what it would be looking like, right? But again, it's very preliminary. Once we started to execute that itself, we realized there's much more broken process than we thought. So we went back. So it wasn't like really a one-time plan itself fixing. We went back and looking to see what fixed it, what we have to go upstream aspect and fixing root cause issues. One of the issues with the finance transformation itself is they never explain it to you. One, change management is extremely difficult. And I realized by talking into it with a lot of people that went through it, they kind of oversimplified it. But if you keep in mind that you have multiple teams, that could be hundreds of thousands of people utilizing this thing itself, making sure there's enough communication ahead of time, which sometimes could take months of doing so, getting commitment from teams and stuff to doing so, that process aspect is always understated. And I did it for sure as well going into it. So how I envision that we can create the technology aspect relatively quickly, especially if you have help with a partner. The hardest part will be able to accommodating that and adopting it within the team. So to your point, we went back redrawing the map, making sure our processes would be able to fit this. And when we molded something, we ended up changing some of it to make it like more simpler and then less complex to be able to adhere to that. And then what we did is later we made it a little bit back into the complicated one, because the adoption thing is that if people knows it's easier a lift of going from what they were doing before questioning the status quo into this, then it's easier for reiterating it later. So we took two different approaches, and I think the simple aspects of which I brought up in the lessons learned proved to be much more powerful. Like start off simple going into it, or else you might be losing the end users actually starting to adopting it. So it all depends on the end case users as far as how it is. But I would say there's not like a one glove fits all kind of scenario. You just have to play along with it, and hopefully if you don't have a lot of root cause issues related to data and stuff, it's going to be an easier path to doing so. Our case then was we just had a lot of acquisitions. We had fragmented systems. It made it harder for us. So our roadmap potentially, quite frankly, telling us within a 6 month or 12 months that we had a plan to doing so, we're actually on to like 18 or 2 years right now, because we went upstream and we really wanted to fix it. And I don't want to deploy something that's kind of, for the lack of a better word, like half-assing it. So I really wanted to make sure that we did have something that is solid, because I wanted to have the trust of the business stakeholders and leadership team that this is something they could rely on. But it takes time if there's trickling upstream issues itself. So I would suggest adopting technology stuff is only one part of it, but make sure that you address the root cause issues that relates to data. Because ultimately, if you don't have clean data coming into it, you're gonna go back anyway. So that would be the ultimate advice I would say, is to make sure clean data, trustworthy data, and transformation goes into Anaplan first, or else you're just gonna be working yourself backwards. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
I know we've talked a lot about the partnership between Fadmoor and Magnit here, but in your opinion, what are some things that make it a good partnership and that you leverage more than others when you think about evolving your Anaplan practice and how you work together?
I like that question. I think it's the fact is like you start seeing them less as a partner, more of a part of the external of the team, right? Because I think in order for you to actually trust them to doing the decision making, because there's an extreme amount of trust you put into the hands of these partners to be able to do these models. It's like they're in your house, right? Making the change itself. So you really want to trust them that they're doing it with the long-term vision in hand. And I think this is what we established relatively early. They understood what we needed before we kind of said it, which made a huge difference. Because in a lot of the partnership actually with sales, we needed to explicitly get to that point to be able to say like, this is what we want to do with this. And then we had to do more of the hand holding. I think a strong partnership is when the hand-holding shifts of them doing it to us versus we doing it to them. And that was basically the big differentiator. We saw it as more of crutches for us to be able to rely on them, but also financially, as far as like anyone being on the finance aspect. So making like a below the line investment on the thing instead of not hitting it the same way financially that it does be using internal workforces was a night and day aspect, especially when you want to be operationally within the financial aspect itself. So it helped us on that aspect, but also the fact that we could basically give prompts of saying, hey, we need this and done. Can you leverage it? Can you validate the data? They go and quite frankly, swiftly coming back after that itself, saying like, we did this, and we can basically focus on the validation aspect. It was really like a night and day impact that us team, we didn't have to spend the time of doing it, but also it would have probably taken us 3 to 5 times longer because we're just getting new training on these itself. So us doing that would take us much longer time itself. In addition, that they already saw a lot of pitfalls that we would run into it. So when we brought up like bringing like a POC of saying like, this is what we wanted to do, I think right off the bat in a lot of those cases, we can't do this, and this because this will run into the issues. So we basically learn a lot of things right off the bat of, okay, let's not go down that path, and we shift it, which would have saved us tremendous amount of time if we ended up doing it ourselves. So I think in that aspect, it showed us not only value on the money aspects of which can only be quantified, but it's the time aspect that you never get back. I think we would have been able to closing it much faster and getting to our point much quicker if we use someone that has the more experience itself. So that's the biggest value that we see using our strategic partner.
Hey, is there anything you would have done differently prior to starting the project? You know, data prep or process, you know, mapping or just understanding things a little bit better, or getting your organization really, in tune with what a true transformation looks like?
100%. I think what I would have done is, first of all, I would have had more of a validation step with the acquirements. When you do acquisitions, I think there should be integration teams are doing. So I think we underestimated the aspect of getting acquirements, basically running them as its own entity. So we didn't consider the fact that what the consolidation would pull a piece into it when we're going to be doing a more streamlined planning approach. If I would have done it differently, to your point, I would have mapped out all of the data sources, all of the different systems itself, in being able to understanding how can we make sure that clean data goes into the model before. And quite frankly, between all of you guys, I think the solution of inputting the platform itself came before doing so. That's why we kind of go backwards itself. So one lesson that I would teach on before going into something like that, take a look at like how data streams comes. Because trust in the data, as I mentioned, data governance is a huge deal, especially when you're dealing with a platform that all it is data. Make sure that it all does it correctly, because what we realize is also is not only does it come out correctly in some case integration, it was wrong to begin with how it was processed. So when you're actually combining it with other entities of other country, you basically, it stands out like a sore thumb. So you really want to make sure, because Anaplan does what it does as far as calculation aspect, but if the data you can't really rely on, you have to do those. And I think instead of taking one step forward, we ended up taking 2-3 steps back. But I'd rather have taken those 2-3 steps back to making sure that it runs through correctly than getting a solution itself that's going to be based on like bad data. So data is going to be the king, and as you're going to be hearing more and more into it, I would prep data flow itself, data integration, data validation and integrity would be my main key and fix up if I had to redo it itself. Focus on that before going into any implementations. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mazi.